Go ahead.
Well, we began this week with you and Bill Ayers going back to 1968, talking about the protests of the time. And as we begin to wrap up, can you share your thoughts about this week?
I think one of the things that struck me most was the level, as I said, of choreographed mass spectacle of this convention that would be really worthy of Leni Riefenstahl, the famous Nazi Hitler's filmmaker and propagandist, in terms of controlling the narrative that the American people receive of what the Democratic Party is about. We've seen that both the Republican convention and the Democratic convention show the two faces of American capitalism. On the one hand, with the Republicans, you have a party of white supremacist capitalism, of anti-immigrant xenophobia, of patriarchy, and war on the working class. And now, this past week, we've seen the party of multiracial neoliberal capitalism, for a party that seeks a kinder and gentler form of mass deportation and border militarization, and one that is even more aggressive in the imperial policies of the United States than even the Republican Party, if you consider that. And both parties sort of having a disconnect with the rest of the world. I was stunned by all the chants of USA, USA, USA throughout the Democratic convention. But the reality is that the United States has never been lower in its prestige and never more discredited around the world than it is today as a result of, especially of its war in Gaza, but of all the attempts at regime
Let's take some Q&A now.
Okay.
I just want to make clear, Center for Immigration Studies is a non-profit, non-political group. We don't endorse candidates, although people are free to endorse any party or candidate they want. The center does not get involved in that. And I had a question about politics. But first I want to ask a question that somebody had sent in, and that is that a significant phenomenon that was true 100 years ago, but much more significant now, is black immigration. In other words, immigration from the Caribbean and from Africa in a very significant way, both legal and illegal. There's significant illegal immigration now, even from Africa. So what, how does that create, what's the story with that? In other words, what is people's reaction? How do you kind of process that? Because when it was immigrants from Europe, you can sort of see. That's what Booker T. Washington was reacting to, Frederick Douglass, A. Philip Randolph. And if it's, illegal aliens from Latin America, again, you can sort of see it as a ethnic difference. But how do you process black immigration?
Well, even Marcus Garvey, who was originally from Jamaica, was against mass
and was deported back to Jamaica.
Yeah, he was against mass immigration. Yeah, listen, black, it's about heritage. It's about our lineage. Who are we? We're black Americans. I can trace my family back, my ancestors back to the 1700s. Okay? So we're black Americans. We have been here since the founding of the country. That matters, does it not? Does it matter that our parents, our ancestors were here since the founding, since the 1600s, since the 1700s? Is that relevant? Is that significant? Yes, I think it is.
And go ahead, I'm sorry.
Oh, I'm sorry. Look, people who break the law break the law. I don't care if you're orange.
Right.
If you come over here, you come over here illegally, you're still taking a job. Let's keep in mind that you have employers who will preference illegal immigrants over natural citizens, and that is still the case even if their skin is darker than them. So it's still hurting everyone. And then a lot of the illegal immigrants that come over here and their skin is dark, they don't see themselves as being the same as I am. They don't identify with the black American experience.
Because they have their culture.
Because that's completely different. And so that still has a significant impact on the financial stability and ability of individuals who come from that lineage in the American experience. their ability to pull themselves out of the lower rungs of society.
You know, Donna and Kathleen, your comments are very much consistent with comments that were made by black leaders and black newspapers 100 years ago. Du Bois, at the same time he was making the comment, they said that the cutting off of white labor has been the salvation of black workers. But at the same time, in that same article, he said, he did kind of say, unfortunately, certainly had a little race consciousness. He says, unfortunately, that means blacks from the Caribbean are cut off too. But he goes, he distinguished that was a racial issue, but African Americans are not about race, it's about history. And the key thing was the history was the people whose families came through slavery. And for so the point of these black leaders and newspapers 100 years ago was that immigration policy should be about helping African Americans, not based on their race, but based on their experience.
Their heritage.
And it had their heritage, and it had nothing to do with helping somebody who happened to be black from some other country.
Right.
So anyway, it's just very interesting hearing your talk because it fits so much with basically. I'm sure that you can find leaders that were more race conscious, but one of the things that I found in some of my recent studies is that the black leaders and editors, they worked so hard to really get away from racial distinctions and idea of race, because that was something that this whole idea of scientific racism had been so harmful to African Americans, and as it turns out, the scientific community eventually got out of that.
Well, I mean, my ancestors didn't slave and sweat and toil and all that hard work that they did for Joanne Reed to have a job. She's from the Congo. They worked for black Americans to have jobs. They did all that for black Americans, not people from the Congo who are first generation Americans. Not even Kamala Harris, who's Indian American and Jamaican.
Right.
My ancestors didn't work for Kamala Harris to have these benefits. They worked for black Americans to have benefits. I think even Obama is not even a black American. This is why using color, the skin color, is not sufficient. It's confusing. And this is why I say white Americans and black Americans have been in America the longest since its founding. And that is significant. That matters. That history matters. And so this is why, and I don't know why so many, and I want to get into this issue about black women, black American women supporting. I know it's nonprofit, but black American women don't understand most of them, some do, but most of them don't understand. They think everything is about skin color, and that's a superficial analysis of the situation. They're not looking at the history, they don't know the history, and they're just so wedded to the political left position, embracing all of their policies, and their policies have been detrimental to black America. They need to get away from that embrace of all these policies that are the detriment. So what I'm thinking, they're not doing their homework. They're not reading this cast your bucket where you are. Cast down your bucket where they're not reading this history. They're being superficial. They're just watching the television and going along with what the politicians say. That is not sufficient.
This raises a point I wanted to bring up, a question basically, and it's really, we've been touching on the issue, but a century ago or more, the top black leaders in the country were critical in different ways, but critical of immigration. Whether it was Booker T. Washington or Du Bois, who were pretty much diametrically opposed in every way you could imagine. Du Bois ended up as a communist, and Booker T. Washington was a self-help guy who, palled around with Teddy Roosevelt, and then Marcus Garvey, obviously. But they all agreed that large-scale immigration, and back then it was mainly legal, but it was still large-scale immigration was a problem.
They believed their eyes.
Right, exactly. They believed sort of, what is it? It's a struggle to see what's in front of your nose or something like that. But there isn't really much of anything like that today, and it's not just among Democratic leaders. Obviously, there are some black Republicans who are critical of immigration, but even there really isn't the same level. In other words, there's nobody who makes even, I mean, I'm not picking on him, but Tim Scott's a pretty high profile, is talked about as potentially vice presidential candidate. Maybe he says something about, well, we need more border control or something, but that's just an easy thing for politicians to say. Why aren't there more black leaders of prominent people? No insult to anybody here, but I'm talking about the top people in the country who are willing to talk about immigration. The issue is just sitting there on the ground waiting for somebody to pick it up.
Well, the establishment. Can I answer?
Yeah, well, let's go ahead, Donna, and then you can go.
I'll say this. Unfortunately, most of the black political leaders that have a platform are actually politicians. Now, I'm from a nonprofit. We don't endorse anyone, but I think that, they go along with whatever the prevailing issue that will keep them in their positions. They don't have boots on the ground in the communities hearing like we do from the people that think this is important. The other thing is, you'll see prominent community leaders on the local level talking about the destruction of illegal immigrants. What's problematic is they're not given a platform. When you have a mainstream media whose primary concern is making sure narratives are consistent with whatever the agenda is, they're not going to give you that platform. In fact, if you notice, and I don't endorse any candidate one way or the other, if you notice Eric Adams, all of a sudden he's under investigation. And many of the members of his team, because he's gotten out of step with what the narrative needs to be. So, but there are people who want to speak up. I have many of them. We just have to have people who are brave enough to be able to allow their voices to be heard. And so that is the biggest issue. It's the platform, not the people in the community who are saying this, because you go to New York, in the Bronx, you go to New York City, you go to Chicago, you can go to Atlanta. I can tell you, you can go to Detroit, and those people are saying the same thing. We want jobs. We can't get those jobs because we have meat packing plants that will only hire illegal.
Right. The thing is that, and obviously you're right, that, look, politicians are politicians. The person you were talking about who was just on Washington Journal, that was Representative Al Green, who's in Houston.
Right.
But one of the, even when there is a political opportunity, my sense is black politicians still don't take it. And the thing that really drove that home to me was 2006. There was a Senate race in Tennessee. It was an open seat. And Harold Ford Jr., who was congressman from Memphis at the time, and he was already in the House of Representatives, his voting record on immigration wasn't terrible for a Democrat. It was actually
good.
Yeah, it was actually good for a Democrat. So the point is, he was open to talking about immigration. He was running against a big business Republican, Bob Corker, who had actually, I think, had some, hired some illegal aliens, so he was vulnerable on that issue. Even then, in the sort of best case scenario, the black politician in question, Harold Ford Jr., whatever his personal, merits or otherwise, didn't take the opportunity that was sitting on the ground in order to win. In other words, there's more than just being a politician, it seems to me.
The pressure. I'm getting
Sure.
but the pressure that comes from the people. So what you have in the black community, and it's been happening for a long time. You have these waves, and each time the poor and the lower middle and the poor get poorer. And then you have the few elites that are given opportunities. Those few elites are afraid, and this is on both sides of the aisle, to go out and speak on an issue even when they agree with it, because they're afraid that they might lose their position. And unfortunately, what happens is these elite individuals that get these positions, their whole families, economic stability is surrounded behind around this one person. You know, when people ask me, why do you say stuff, Donna? Because I've already lived a good life. I don't care. I don't have much to lose. I don't care what people do to me. Right now, it's just about the truth.
And interestingly,
But a lot of people are afraid of that.
yeah, but I mean, and to follow on that, to sort of confirm your point, some of the prominent leaders like Washington, like Du Bois and others, they actually did kind of have their chains yanked by donors.
Yeah, they did.
In other words, they kind of trimmed their sails later on because donors who were a big source of their funding, like you're suggesting, said, yeah, we don't want to hear any more of that. So,
Well, I mean, let's just face it. This is the truth. The establishment does not have the interests of America or Americans. The media, the politicians are the establishment. Uniparty, both parties. The media is the establishment. I watch Washington Journal every morning. All they have on there is establishment news. The government is supposed to be by we, the people. We are in charge, not the politicians, not the establishment. So it's topsy-turvy, okay? The American people are being gaslit by the politicians because the documentation is substantiated. The positions from the 1800s, it hasn't changed, it's only gotten worse. Things have gotten worse. So and all the folks that call into Washington Journal, they believe the politicians. This is very naive, this is very gullible. The politicians do not have your interests because they are the establishment. You must do research outside of what you hear on TV and find out what's going on because the politicians don't have your interests. They have the establishment's interests. And it's so clear now. I mean, what we're witnessing now with this cognitive decline of Biden. I mean, this is the biggest cover-up in American history. And why did it happen? We have to ask ourselves, how did this take place that the media was sort of in cahoots with covering this up? What does this say to us? What does this tell us about the media and the establishment? What do we learn from this?
And I think the one thing, I'm sorry, I'm gonna stop.
okay.
The one thing I would add is don't underestimate the fact that a lot of people just like the issue. I have an issue, and this issue is actually profitable for me. So I'm not going to really work hard to get rid of it, even though there's always another issue. That's the thing. There's always another. Get past this basic problem. I mean, we're just at Maslow's, basic needs right now. There's other issues that need to be solved, but this is like a small step in, the evolution of what can be in terms of prosperity and what the American dream is about. But there's a lot of black elites on both sides of the aisle that just like to be able to talk about the issue. They don't want it to be solved.
Well, and Black Americans reduce everything to racism. And the political left, the Democratic Party reduces everything to racism. That's not sufficient. That's superficial, that's shallow. You gotta go deeper. Other things are taking place. You can't reduce everything to racism because everything is not racism. There are other issues. Economic issues are more important, I think.
Before we get to the next question, I just wanted to make sure we, first of all, re-emphasize Black America for Immigration Reform. The website is protectblackworkers.org. And
Economics.
yes,
Economics.
exactly, economic. And do you guys have a Twitter handle yet, or?
No, I don't have
Okay.
a Twitter handle.
You have a Twitter handle,
Yeah,
right?
I'm the former radio host of the Naked Truth Report. Now I'm the executive director
Right.
of BAIR.
And you're on Twitter at Kathleen TNTR,
Right, because I used to have the Naked Truth Report
Right,
radio
right.
show for 5 years, and Roy was a guest on my show. We discussed his book, Back of the Hiring Line. This is another important issue that I want to point out in his book, is that the Statue of Liberty was meant for the newly freed slaves and their descendants. So the Statue of Liberty is not meant for immigrants. It's for the newly freed slaves and their descendants. So you see, the establishment confuses everything. This is what I think.
We did have a question I wanted to get in, and this is about sort of occupational segregation or racism, and I'm filling in a little here from the question, but you know, decades ago, unions froze black workers out of certain sort of better paying trades, you know, sort of higher level, whatever it was, carpentry and stuff like that. It was hard to break in. That obviously doesn't exist anymore, but does large scale immigration almost kind of recreate that phenomenon where it's hard to say, if you're a young black man, to get into, you know, to break into construction if it's almost like there's a cartel of illegal immigrants or even just immigrants in general being hired. So in other words, the union halls don't have to say, you know, blacks aren't allowed here, we're not going to hire them, because immigration kind of does the same job without having to write it down.
Yeah, and I'd say the first rung of the ladder issue is so key to this, is that what's happened is the first rung of the ladder in every kind of occupation, the real wage has gone down, down, down ever since the 65 and 90 Immigration Acts. So that makes the jobs less attractive. And then as you fill them more and more with foreign labor, the foreign labor don't come in expecting American level working conditions. So they will accept lower working conditions than what Americans accept. And you know, black Americans are Americans, right? Black Americans should expect American level working conditions. So you get this vicious cycle in which those bottom rung jobs are not being taken, not being offered, not being recruited to black Americans, especially black American men.
And the
And
point
if you
is
don't
not
get,
that,
if you don't get on, if you don't get on the first rung of the
Right.
ladder, you don't get to the second rung and the third rung. So the occupational thing is really, blacks are being segmented out of the better jobs because they don't get at age 19 or 22, they're not on the first rung.
Right.
And in Los Angeles, in the construction industry, you have to speak Spanish
right, yeah.
to work in
And the
construction.
point is, it changes this happens in Miami too. I remember years ago, there was some kind of public meeting in Miami, and it was a young black man who said, look, I fought in Vietnam, and now I have to speak Spanish
Now
in
you
order
have
to
to
get a
speak
job.
Exactly.
And, you know, I understand.
And
Donna?
the thing that I was going to add, because I lived in San Diego for a long time, got my degree from California State University. There's within that run, so once you start hiring illegal immigrants, or you hire one or two, then he will actually prevent African Americans from getting in, even if they want to. So there's a preference where they, as a group, will lock out anyone who's not La Familia. If you live in California, you know that. So
Right.
it's all, anybody that's not within that circle does not get the opportunity, even if they want it. I'll tell you this, minorities will work any job if it's available for them. But I remember when they wouldn't give me a job when I was in California, because I didn't speak Spanish, they wouldn't rent an apartment to me because I was not Hispanic. I would have to send in a friend to go in and say, hey,
Wow.
I sent in a friend who was Latino, who would go in there, and then they say, yes, we have apartments available. But when I went in, they said, we don't have any.
Interesting.
And this happened
You see the prejudice?
countless
But this is
times.
human nature, right?
It was, even in the college. When I went to, I applied for San Diego State and the community college there in Chula Vista. They gave me a hard time. I had to go to Miramar, where the population was more Caucasian, Asian, to be able to get in, even though I was actually a honor student. Each time they had more barriers to stop me from being able to get
But
in.
this is human
so
nature,
they
right?
create that.
This is human nature, how
Very.
human nature works. And this is why I'm saying white Americans and black Americans matter, because they've been in the country longest. So these other groups that have just come subsequent to the 1964 Immigration Act, they're trying to get their foothold in America. But we, black Americans and white Americans, should be priority, because we've been here since the 1600s, since its founding. We should be priority. Yeah, you can get your group thing going, but this is human nature, okay? But it's about heritage. It's about how long we've been in the country, and we are the descendants of the ancestors who've been here since the founding of America. We should not be second-rate, we should not be second-class citizens, because our ancestors paid the price already to help build America. Am I right?
And this is, and again, you know, it's sad that we have to go back 100 years to find the leaders, but this is what the black editors, and you read what they said, and they said, it says, that if it doesn't help anybody else, it will help us, and
Right.
that's enough. They said
Right.
our survival is reason enough for cutting immigration, and that's the point right now. I do think there's a positive. I think we're in a little bit of a positive trend right now. Things are getting worse, but I think some of the things you all have been saying about the fact is the grassroots, the black grassroots, the polling has shown for years, the majority of the black grassroots, which means the majority of black Democrats, agree that mass immigration needs to be stopped. They agree there needs to be mandatory e-verify to keep illegal aliens from jobs. In other words, the black grassroots are on the same side as where the black leaders were 100 years ago. Now, because of this crazy thing at the border, you've got whole communities, black communities now, they're speaking out. I think there's a chance, the only chance that black political leaders will take the side of the black grassroots is if the black grassroots presses them. Right now, the black political leaders on immigration are doing the bidding of the business community. That's what they've been doing for the last at least
Or
the
the
last 40 years.
establishment.
Well, and which is but the business community plays well for
Right.
keeping the flow of those workers.
I want to add this. The reason why I was so against identity politics, I mean, there's a number of reasons why, but I'll say this. I experienced more racism for illegal immigrants than I have from white Americans. When I hear people talk about multiculturalism, right, they talk about, and they use capitalism as the model. And I can sit there and say, name a city, and I'll tell you what ethnic group lives there, because they're so segregated.
Mm-hmm.
The discrimination that African Americans experience in California is not for white Americans. In fact, it's from the immigrants. Old Time Lake is where all the new illegal immigrants come in. San Isidro, where all the illegal immigrants live. Chula Vista, then you get to upper class Bonita, where the more upper class Latinos that are more phased in. But the most racism that I've ever experienced was from Latino illegal immigrants in the state of California. You don't think that's happening in Chicago right now? That's why they're forming gangs. That's why they're recruiting.
One last point, we're getting at the end, so we've only got a couple minutes left, is this isn't so much a specific question, but just an observation. The irony that in 1965, the 1965 immigration law, which restarted mass immigration, was passed in part as a civil rights measure. In other words, it was kind of part of the civil rights movement because the law up to that point, the 1924 law and its various changes, while they were wildly beneficial for Americans of all kinds, it did have this mechanism that was explicitly race-based, or at least national origins-based, fewer Italians and more Irish or whatever
Right,
it is.
exactly.
So getting rid of that was seen as a civil rights measure. It was explicitly presented that way. It was passed when the Civil Rights Act had been passed the year before, all kinds of other civil rights measures. And so the irony is that what was passed as in part a civil rights measure
Right.
has in fact ended up
Destroying.
undermining the
Destroying.
interests of the people
Right.
that the civil rights movement was supposed to help.
I agree with you completely. It was the Immigration Act was passed a year after the Civil Rights Act. Listen, everything needs to be reassessed and reexamined. Everything, even the Civil Rights Act. You know, I always say Martin Luther King needs to be looked at again. Do you think Martin Luther King would be happy with that? Black Americans only have 25% two-parent households. Do you think Martin Luther King would be happy that Black America is now facing zero median wealth by 2053? Do you think Martin Luther King would be happy that 40% of the homeless in Los Angeles are Black Americans? Do you think Martin Luther King would be happy that the Democratic Party said that, you know, we're all people of color now? We're all people of color against white folks. Even if they're white Americans, white conservatives, because Black Democrats are pro-white liberals, and white liberals pump free sex feminism, sexual revolution, which destroyed the Black family, destroying all families. So we need to go back and re-examine everything that we've been told. Okay?
Donna?
Well, you know, the thing that I like to add is they always disguise civil rights with intended consequences to cause people to be in constant states of survival so that they can control. Don't always think because they said, oh, we're going to, you know, give you this great mass immigration that is going to help you. No, they know that that's going to immediately cause chaos in the community. It's immediately cause trauma for families, for individuals trying to figure out who they are and how they build their way up. They did this with that in mind to make sure that these communities never thrive.
Right.
You know, you don't get individuals with policies that's supposed to be a war on poverty where 60 years, there's more of it.
Right.
Poverty
So
won.
Right.
that it's not the war. I say it's not the war against poverty. It's the war for poverty.
Right.
We need to always be figuring out another way to make sure that if they get two steps forward, it's one step backwards.
Exactly.
So all of a sudden now, you know, you don't have Black ownership
A
in
business.
Black communities.
Right.
They own nothing. And what I tell white Americans is, don't worry about it because it's coming to a neighborhood near you.
Yeah.
We were the incubators, and it worked. And then now they're going to spread it out to everybody. They use the narratives of if you say something or speak up, then somehow you're destroying democracy or you're racist or something
Right.
like that. You know what? I don't worry about what people say to me in words. I want to see results.
Right.
I want to see outcomes. I would rather have a guy sit there and say he don't like me personally, and you know what? It's a lot of people I don't like personally, so what? But at the end of the day, what have you done for me economically lately? And the
policies.
answer is, when you look at it, if you look at the amount of mass immigration happening in minority communities, there's a indirect correlation in the amount of crime, because if I can't find a job, I'm going to rob you. If I can't find a job, then I'm going to hurt you because I'm hurting. That's the bottom line. There's a difference. There's a correlation, and they want that. We gotta keep. Well, if they're decriminalizing things, you know, because you can steal 950 items a day, dollars worth of items a day, then we got to think of new ways for you to kill each other.
Mhm.
Well,
And there's no outcomes.
we're out of time, and I just wanted to, this was Donna Jackson, Director of Membership Development at BAIR, Kathleen
Project
Wells,
21.
thank you, and Project
And
21.
Project 21.
Donna Jackson, Kathleen Wells, Executive Director at BAR, and just to emphasize, it's protectblackworkers.org is the website. And Roy Beck, author of Back of the Hiring Line, a 200-year history of immigration surges, employer bias, and depression of black wealth.
Read his
Available,
book, read his
available
book.
on Amazon.
On Amazon, yeah.
Yep. And I want to thank everybody for coming in. Thanks to all of you for tuning in. And this will be posted, the recording will be posted, so if you came in halfway through, you'll be able to watch the whole thing from the
And
beginning if you like.
we take donations at protectblackworkers.org for BEAR. We're a
Okay.
nonprofit.
Yeah.
And you can find more about Project 21 Black Leadership Network at thenationalcenter.org.
I'm also a member of
And
Project
she's
21.
also one
We're
of
both
our
members,
members.
and we work together.
Very good.
A lot of these issues.
Thank you, Roy. Thank you,
Thank you for
Kathleen.
having
Thank
me.
you, Donna.